Tonight on Primetime Politics, defending a controversial move.
We want to maintain our presence in Canada, and we've got a great history. We want to continue to build on that history.
Stellantis Canada is summoned to appear before committee, forced to answer questions about closing a Canadian assembly line in favor of another in Illinois. So how should Ottawa move forward with the car company? We will speak to the head of the Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association, Flavio Volpe. Also, as the Prime Minister comes face-to-face with Donald Trump in Asia, we look at Mark Carney's upcoming meeting with China's president later this week. But is the People's Republic a trading partner Canada wants? We'll examine the issue. And
U.S. tariffs and trade uncertainty have weakened the Canadian economy.
What a cut in interest rates tells us about the economic challenges Canada is facing. This is Primetime Politics. Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Serapio. Jeff Hines is a Stellantis executive, and until recently, he was president of Stellantis Canada, which is why today he was called upon to testify before a parliamentary committee. Asked to explain why his company decided to end production of a Jeep vehicle in Brampton, Ontario, in favor of a facility in Illinois. The federal government is considering legal action against Stellantis for moving jobs out of Canada. But take a listen to what we heard from Mr. Hines himself about how he sees Stellantis' future in this country, despite shutting down the Brampton plant.
We want to be in Canada. We have had a great, strong history in Canada. We've added 2,500 jobs roughly between what we have done at Cumming at Windsor and what we've done with our battery plant as well, and then the additional engineering jobs that we brought to our research and development center here. So we are committed to Canada. We want to maintain our presence in Canada, and we've got a great history. We want to continue to build on that history.
Now, Mr. Hines' testimony comes as uncertainty about the future of Canada's auto industry and U.S. trade continues to grow, a situation that may have been exacerbated by the American ambassador Pete Hoekstra, who at a Monday night gala in Ottawa gave Ontario's trade representative a verbal dress down, a tirade that reportedly included profanity, expressing anger and frustration for those anti-tariff ads sponsored by the Ontario government. Now, the run of this ad has since been suspended, but only after Donald Trump stopped trade talks with Canada and threatened an additional 10% tariff on Canadian goods. Well, Flavio Volpe is the president of the Canadian Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association. He joins us right now. Flavio, it's good to see you. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me on.
Listen, I want to begin here with Mr. Hines because, you know, one big reason why parliamentarians want to speak with him is because Ottawa is considering legal action against Stellantis. Is that something that should be pursued, or should politicians be wary of threatening punishment, wary of alienating the car company?
Look, first I want to say Jeff Hines and that company were big investors and have been big investors in Canada for 100 years. And then especially on this Windsor battery investment that included a footprint in Brampton and Windsor. They didn't invite Donald Trump to lead the White House, and they're dealing with it like everybody else. Times are very tough, and the auto business is 6 to 7% profit business. And so they made some tough decisions that were important for their company, but they've got to face some consequences on it. The tough decision was they had an empty plant in Belvidere, Illinois, and a very persuasive UAW that said, look, we need product here. And, you know, they have a plant that was retooling in Brampton that had that product going to it, and they chose to make the American stakeholders happy here. I get that. But, you know, the people of Canada, through the government of Canada and the government of Ontario in this case, invested heavily with Stellantis. And people like me and Lana Payne, who runs the union at Unifor, spent a lot of time explaining to Canadians, including parliamentarians, why those investments were critical and important and timely. And so I think it's fair for parliamentarians to say to Mr. Hines and the company, what happened, what changed, why did you choose Belvidere, Illinois over Brampton, Ontario? And if you're breaching terms of a multi-billion-dollar agreement, I think it's fair for the counterparty here, in this case, the government of Canada, to say we want you to pay for that.
Okay, so we'll see how that all shapes up. But we already know that Donald Trump, and he said so in the White House when Mark Carney was down there, that he does not think car assembly belongs in Canada. Parts maybe, but not assembly. The president of the Business Council of Canada has suggested that that might be an outcome Canada should embrace. But you don't agree with that. In fact, you push back. Why?
Sure. Look, the head of the BCC, he's representing, or his organization represents, CEOs from across the economy. But if you talk to the two auto CEOs on his council, Rob Wildeboer, chair of Martin Rea, and Linda Hassefras, chair of Linamar, they tell him that the auto business is centered, it's clustered around the assembly plants. It's kind of like having a restaurant that makes hamburgers, and you say, look, I love the fries and I love the pickles and we love the sauce, and we could be in that business even if the McDonald's moved away. Well, that's not the case. And we have to protect this auto assembly business. And part of the reason why Mr. Hines is in front of committee is that the assembly business is the center of the cluster that attracts material sciences, raw materials, critical minerals, volume parts, and then R&D and innovation spend in hardware and software. And 50% of the parts that come out of Canadian factories go into Canadian assembly plants. So if they all left, like Mr. Hyder thought might be a good saw-off, then the Canadian auto parts suppliers would lose half their business. And all of this clustering that goes to places like Stellantis in Windsor, that's got an R&D facility, it's got a battery plant and an assembly plant. All that activity, all those pitches, all that working together will happen in Warren, Michigan, or Auburn Hills. And once it's gone, it's gone. I think it's a dangerous slope. We shouldn't be appeasing King George. We should be stealing for the fight.
Okay, well, stealing for a fight, and one way Ontario has done that, at least, is to run those anti-tariff ad campaigns south of the border. Obviously, the U.S. president does not like that. The U.S. ambassador, from what we heard happening earlier this week, takes offense to those ads as well. Do you worry that Canadian industry will be punished for these, I guess, more political moves that we're seeing on air?
I think the president is very sensitive to his party's prospects in next year's midterms. You know, they got a 3-seat majority in Congress, and that could flip and change the whole calculus for him. And so I think probably the thing that he took poorly from these ads is that this Reagan argument, the fact that President Reagan thought that tariffs were a good short-term tool, but that they were bad for American business, I think it resonates in the U.S. And, you know, yesterday, the senior senator from Kentucky, Mitch McConnell, who was a Trump enabler and platformer in 1.0, said that he would vote in the Senate this week on Tim Kaine's resolution to declare the IEEPA tariffs, the economic emergency tariffs on Canada illegal. And so, of course, the ambassador who speaks for the president, like the speaker in every house in North Korea speaks for their dear leader, is telling Canadians that he's displeased with it. But what he's really doing is telling Canadians just how displeased the president is, and don't take that lightly. Frankly, I thought the argument was a useful one and delivered in a respectful way. And if the White House thought that there was value in the negotiations with Canada, he probably wouldn't have just flicked them away with this excuse. I think there's a lot more at play here.
So what strategy do you think needs to be pursued here by Canadian and officials in Ontario? Is it this, you know, tough love, as we've kind of seen with threatening Stellantis and running these ads, or do we need to change course a bit, do you think?
Well, I think at the core of it, everybody has got the same objective, whether it's Ontario and the federal government, at least in the auto sector. It's keep defend that assembly cluster in Canada. So I think they may have disagreement on how to do it. Certainly, we saw part of that play out, but there's no malignant intent on either end to sideline the others. At the core of it, there's a relationship play, I think, because this is not a regulated or a legislated process in negotiating away these unprecedented national security tariffs or economic emergency tariffs. The president and the prime minister are in Malaysia, and I think one of the things that is in our arsenal is that the prime minister takes the president aside, or at least tries to, and says, hey, no harm, no foul here. Let's try to get these things back online. But if they don't, I don't think we should panic, and I don't think that we should start saying things like we should. It's too hard to win a negotiation with the Americans, and let's start saying goodbye to automotive assembly, or let's start making concessions against dairy because it'll make it easier. The one thing we have learned with Donald Trump is that appeasing him doesn't get you any further.
Flavio Volpe, always appreciate the insight. Thank you for this.
Thank you.
So you heard us talk about the U.S. ambassador, and the Ontario Premier did address reports about Peter Hoekstra and the ambassador's choice words for the province's trade rep. Take a listen to what we heard earlier this afternoon from Doug Ford.
I'm not telling him, I'm suggesting that, if you get hot-headed one day, call Dave up and say, I apologize, sorry, got a little heated. So, that's as simple as that. People get in disagreements. It's unbecoming of an ambassador. I've never heard of this in my entire life. But the ambassador's a different type of cat. He thinks I'm a different type of cat, but he's a different type of cat as well. So, Pete, do the right thing. Give the guy a call. Let's move on.
It's been nearly a week since Donald Trump ended trade talks with Canada. And while the U.S. president says he would not meet with the prime minister, quote, for a long time, the two did come face-to-face in South Korea earlier today. Both are in the city of Gyeongju for the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit. And both Trump and Mark Carney found themselves sitting across from each other at a table for 8 hosted by the South Korean president. The two reportedly exchanged pleasantries, and when asked after the dinner how things went, well, the Prime Minister said he had good conversations with the presidents, plural, gathered at the table. Though for his part, Mr. Trump did share this message on Truth Social earlier, quote, saying, "For those that are asking, we didn't come to South Korea to see Canada." So we'll see if Carney and Trump have any further meetings or exchanges at the APEC summit. What we do know is the Prime Minister is scheduled to have a meeting with another president, China's president, with reports saying that Mark Carney will talk with Xi Jinping on Friday. Now, Canada and China PRC have been having a bit of a rapprochement in recent weeks, and to talk about the potential benefits and pitfalls of expanding that relationship is Charles Burton. Now, Mr. Burton's a former Canadian diplomat to the People's Republic and the author of a new book released last week. It is called The Beaver and the Dragon: How China Outmaneuvered Canada's Diplomacy, Security and Sovereignty. Charles Burton, nice to see you face to face finally.
It's good to be with you.
So listen, as I said, we've been seeing this rapprochement a bit between Canada and China, and that might make sense because China PRC is this country's second largest trading partner. Does it make sense to you, though, to be pursuing more business with China?
Well, I guess the thing is that the Chinese do have the ability to open up their market to our agricultural commodities. I mean, they can decide that they're going to buy soybeans from Canada and not so many from Brazil if that's the will of the central government. So we do have the potential to try and resolve the issue of the tariffs with the United States, unemployment, businesses transferring to the States by selling more to the People's Republic of China. But they're not going to give us more access to their market for nothing. They're going to extract a cost, and I think that cost will be in the non-trade aspects of the relationship.
Okay, non-trade, and when you say that, I think of, for example, China's foreign policy. And there are obviously points of contention between the People's Republic and what Canada views as acceptable. For example, the relationship with Taiwan, the status of the Taiwan Strait, the fact that China has provided material support to Russia during the invasion of Ukraine. What type of pressure do you see being applied to Canada if we pursue greater trade with the People's Republic?
Well, I think the United States won't be happy if we do that. Certainly, you know, the Chinese ambassador has said that the crippling tariffs on our canola seeds would be removed if Canada would remove our 100% tariff on the import of Chinese electric vehicles. I have heard that the United States might consider not allowing Chinese EVs into the United States. So if you owned one and wanted to drive it to Florida, you'll be stopped at the border and told, I guess, to walk or something. So, you know, that is a serious issue. I think in general, the kinds of things that China would expect from Canada in exchange for giving us privileged access to their market would be that we, for example, wouldn't implement the foreign agents registry that Bill C-70 that went through Parliament in June 2024 calls for, that we wouldn't expel Chinese agents, that we wouldn't continue our pursuit over Chinese influence operations in Canada and Chinese harassment of persons of Chinese origin in our country. So, you know, these are concerns that have been quite prominent over the past couple of years with the Ogg Commission and other revelations about Chinese espionage activities and transfer of dual-use military technologies from Canada into China. I don't think China would like us to engage in any way in dealing with those, expelling espionage agents and so on. And essentially, even if we can get the tariffs off the canola, which would be huge because it impacts on 40,000 prairie farmers, and you know, is of the $12 billion of canola that we produce every year, we've been sending $4 or $5 billion to China alone. So that would be a massive improvement. But what prevents China later on, if they have some other concern comparable to the crisis we had when we detained the Huawei CFO Meng Wanzhou in response to a U.S. extradition request, would they say, well, you know, your potash has too many rocks in it, or you're subsidizing your pulp and paper? I mean, there's always going to be some way that China can engage in economic leverage against us, and the history of it is that they will.
Okay, so they will. So I do wonder then, how does China PRC view Canada?
I think they see us as a place far away that could serve China's economic rise by providing natural resources. I don't think that they have respect for our political independence or our democratic system. So there's also been broached by the Asia Pacific Foundation the possibility that China would ask Canada to join the Belt and Road Initiative, which is a global infrastructure, maritime and land-based infrastructure program to essentially facilitate the transfer of natural resources from countries like Canada or Africa or South America to Chinese production. All those belts and roads end in China. So that would be something that would get us considerable Chinese investment. They'd want to improve ports and internal transportation facilities. But at what cost for Canada as an independent nation if we become too dependent on the Chinese economy and too readily susceptible to coercion by that regime?
And there has been a signal that there is an openness here in Ottawa for at least starting free trade talks with the People's Republic. So what then is your, advice? Because here we are, we're talking about this because, again, there's going to be a meeting between Mark Carney and Xi Jinping come Friday at the APEC summit. What is your advice then to the government about the things they need to be watching out for?
Well, I think that we should make it clear to the Chinese authorities that we oppose their international behavior. You know, there was a unanimous resolution of the House of Commons declaring that Chinese action against the Uyghurs is tantamount to genocide under the UN Convention on Genocide. I don't think we should hold back on that. And I don't think that we should tolerate agents of the Chinese regime who are harassing our fellow Canadians of Han Chinese or Tibetan or Uyghur origin. I think we really have to tell the Chinese government that we're just not going to tolerate that anymore. And the espionage, the restrictions that we're giving to Chinese access to certain Canadian labs engaged in sensitive research, or in fact China's desire to mine for critical minerals in our north, or China's activities in the Arctic against infringing on Canadian sovereign borders. I think we have to tell them that, you know, we're not going to give way on any of this. But it is possible to sell things that China needs. They need our canola. They need our other agricultural products. And if we can come up with a means of fair, mutually beneficial trade, so be it. But China very rarely doesn't attach non-trade conditions to trade. So it may be difficult for us to engage China in that way. So I think we're better off with the other initiatives that Mr. Carney has undertaken on this trip, the free trade with ASEAN, the negotiations of free trade with the Philippines, the giving Malaysia's Petronas access to developing our liquefied natural gas, and the Trans-Pacific Partnership and more coordination with like-minded countries in Europe. I mean, clearly it's very difficult for us to engage in enduring trustworthy relationships with either China or the United States under current conditions. So I think we have to be seriously looking elsewhere.
Charles Burton, I always appreciate the conversation. Thank you for this. The new book is called The Beaver and the Dragon, How China Outmaneuvered Canada's Diplomacy, Security and Sovereignty. Charles, thank you again.
Thank you.
Now, of course, trade with China is taking on greater significance because Trump's trade policies are hammering the Canadian economy. And today, we got an indication of just how badly the economy is being hit, with the Bank of Canada governor announcing a further rate cut, putting the bank's benchmark rate to 2.25%.
The weakness we're seeing in the Canadian economy is more than a cyclical downturn. It's also a structural adjustment. The U.S. trade conflict has diminished Canada's economic prospects. The structural damage caused by tariffs is reducing the productive capacity of the economy, and it's adding costs. This limits the ability of monetary policy to boost demand while maintaining low inflation.
Well, to walk us through the decision and help us understand what it says about the economy, we're now reaching out to Pedro Antunes, Chief Economist with the Conference Board of Canada. Pedro, hello to you.
Hi, Michael.
Listen, in bringing down its bank rate, you know, for the fourth time this year, the governor points to the huge impacts Donald Trump's trade policies are actually having on the economy. And I'm wondering if you will, because I think it's a worthwhile place to start, walk us through what that impact is, because we do get it, you know, in drips and drabs, exports down here, production cut over there. But overall, what has been the impact to Canada's bottom line?
Well, I mean, obviously, it's really hard to disentangle all of the things that are happening all at once. But we certainly are looking at an economy, and in fact, the Bank of Canada has a very similar forecast to ours. That's essentially running about 1.2% this year. Well, we're, you know, more than halfway through the year, so obviously that's kind of locked in. But even for next year, I think we're essentially both our organization and the Bank of Canada is looking at 1.1%. Well, we actually have a little stronger than that, but about 1% or 1.1% growth for next year. So this is a pace of growth that is half of what really our economy should be growing at. And moreover, the bank doesn't see a lot of relief even in 2027. So not much of a rebound at all, really, even in that year. And I think this is the ongoing direct impact of these tariffs on certain sectors of the economy, obviously. But more importantly, it's the kind of broader impact on the global economy that has an impact on our resource prices and on uncertainty. We have frozen up our investment and our hiring in Canada right now, and that doesn't bode well for kind of the future growth path. Okay, so a troubling future in the near term. So why is the bank signaling that another rate cut would be unlikely? Because at 2.25%, it could theoretically go lower, as it did, you know, post-pandemic, to try to get economic activity going in this country. Yeah, I do think they're keeping something in reserve here should things get worse. So right now we've taken a big hit in the second quarter because our exports fell dramatically after taking that, essentially getting exports up in the first quarter ahead of the tariffs. Then we saw a big decline. But the bank notes, and I've talked about this before as well, we're roughly 5-6% in terms of our exports below normal. So this is, essentially a big hit to the economy. And what we're seeing is no employment growth thus far this year. So these two things, they're very close to recession. But looking forward, we know the third quarter is holding steady. So not really a technical recession, hopefully some growth there. And as I mentioned, the bank is projecting slightly stronger growth as we head into next year. If that pattern holds and we don't see any additional pressures on inflation, the bank is essentially suggesting it will sit at the neutral rate. What that means is somewhere between not affecting the economy in a positive or negative way. In other words, the neutral rate, essentially doesn't stimulate nor take away. But should things get worse, should we start to see more significant job losses or the economy continuing to decline or a recession, 2 quarters of negative growth, we may indeed see the bank lower rates further.
Okay, so something to watch out for, and I wonder if you can, put this in a bit more layman terms, if you will, Pedro, because we've heard the Prime Minister say that the months ahead will require sacrifice. And while he's referring to fiscal policy, when you couple that with what you're now hearing from the Bank of Canada governor, essentially monetary policy, what are Canadians looking at? Tough times ahead? You mentioned a fear of recession. What's your take on the immediate future for this country?
Well, I think it's really a very lackluster scenario for employment growth. I think that's the starting point, and that's what's most painful. We know that we have had some job losses, and in fact, labor markets have really slackened, especially for the young. And I like to point out it's not just 15 to 24, but especially 15 to 19. So the very young aren't getting into the labor market right now. So that is obviously a pain point for young people with the current situation that we're seeing. Of course, for homeowners, for households, inflation is still there. I know that gasoline, the effect of the carbon tax has knocked inflation down a little bit, but when you look at some of the basics, food, rents, these things are still increasing with very, very strong inflation. And finally, even as we've seen interest rates come down, we know that mortgage renewals, for a lot of people that took on mortgages in 2020, 21, those renewals are going to come in at higher rates. So there's more pressure in terms of debt financing costs. I'm afraid it sounds like all bad news, but I'm afraid it is. And there's just more pressure from that on households in general.
Okay, and of course today's rate decision comes before the government's budget that will be tabled next Tuesday. We'll see how the government will leverage its fiscal policy to navigate the challenges. Pedro, I know you and I will speak around that budget, so until then, thank you for this. Appreciate the time this evening.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me, Michael.
And of course, we will have full coverage for you next Tuesday on the federal budget. But for now, this is Primetime Politics for this Wednesday. I'm Michael Serapio. Thank you for watching. We're back tomorrow evening. Until then, take care.